There comes a moment in life when suffering stops feeling like a passing storm and starts to feel personal, almost intelligent, as if something unseen has been studying you, measuring you, choosing exactly where to press and exactly what to take. You try to make sense of it in ordinary ways at first. You call it bad luck. You call it timing. You call it the cruelty of other people or the unfairness of the world, or the consequence of one mistake that somehow grew larger than it should have. But after enough losses, after enough doors close at the exact moment you thought your life was finally opening, a deeper question begins to form in the quiet. It is no longer just, why is this happening? It becomes, why does it feel arranged? That question is where the old wisdom begins. Thoth, keeper of sacred measure, was never concerned with the surface drama of human life alone. In the deeper traditions, he is the voice behind hidden order, the one who understands that what appears chaotic from below may look precise from above. And that is the first truth many people resist, especially when pain is still fresh. What hurt you may not have been meaningless. What delayed you may not have been empty. What broke your plans may not have been a detour away from your path, but the very shape of the path itself. This is hard for the wounded mind to accept, because the wounded mind wants immediate explanation. It wants fairness it can recognize. It wants a clear reward for goodness and a clear punishment for wrongdoing. It wants life to move in straight lines, so effort becomes success, love becomes safety, and faith becomes peace. But real transformation rarely happens in straight lines. It happens through pressure, through waiting, through confusion, through the collapse of things you were sure would last. The soul is not strengthened by ease alone. It is refined by friction. It is taught through contrast. It begins to see through darkness in ways it never could in full daylight. That is why some struggles enter your life with such force. They are not only there to wound, they are there to reveal. They reveal where you were building on illusion. They reveal what in you depended too much on approval, certainty, comfort, or control. They reveal how much of your identity was borrowed from roles that could be taken away. And when those roles fall apart, when the relationship ends, when the dream fails, when the version of yourself you trusted can no longer carry you, something terrifying begins to happen. You meet the raw self beneath all performance. At first, that meeting feels like emptiness. You look around and do not recognize your own life. The future becomes difficult to picture. The old language stops working. Advice that once sounded wise now feels shallow. Even the people around you may not understand what is happening because they can only see the event while you're living the inner earthquake it created. And yet this is often the exact threshold where deeper sight begins. When the noise of certainty falls away, you can finally hear what has been whispering under your life all along. Many people imagine spiritual destiny as something bright, graceful, and instantly recognizable. They picture it arriving with clarity, with confidence, with signs so obvious that no doubt remains. But ancient wisdom says something more unsettling and far more beautiful. The greater the vessel, the deeper the carving. The larger the calling, the more life may seem to resist it at first, not because you are abandoned, but because you're being formed in secret. A shallow soul can remain untouched by hardship and still move through the world smiling. A deeper soul is asked to become spacious enough to hold sorrow without becoming bitter, uncertainty without collapsing, power without corruption, and truth without illusion. This shaping does not feel noble when you are inside it. It feels exhausting. It feels unfair. It feels like watching other people receive the simple blessings you begged for while your own life keeps moving through strange cycles of gain and loss. But Thoth's wisdom would ask you to look again, not with the eyes of the personality alone, but with the eyes of pattern. Look at what your hardest years taught you to notice. Look at how quickly you learned to read energy, intention, and false promises. Look at how suffering sharpened your perception. Look at how many masks fell away. Look at the kind of strength that now exists in you. Not the loud kind that needs to be seen, but the quiet kind that knows how to remain standing after everything familiar has been stripped back. There's a hidden architecture in that. Not every pain was sent by the divine. Human cruelty is real. Loss is real. Disorder is real. But even then, something greater can work through the ruins. This is the mystery. The plan is not always visible in what happened to you. Sometimes it is revealed in what the experience made possible within you. A deeper patience, a stronger inner center, a refusal to betray your own soul just to be accepted, a hunger for what is real, a sensitivity to the unseen, a growing awareness that your life cannot be understood only by external milestones. When you begin to see that, the story changes. Your struggles are no longer just a record of damage. They become evidence of formation. The nights of confusion become chambers where inner sight was quietly developing. The betrayals become moments that separated you from false alignment. The delays become spaces where something in you was ripening beyond your awareness. Even the moments when you thought life had forgotten, you may have been the moments when life was teaching you to find a center that did not depend on applause, success, or immediate proof. And this is where the burden begins to turn into meaning. Not because the past suddenly feels easy, and not because every wound becomes beautiful, but because you no longer see yourself as random. You begin to sense that something ancient has been moving beneath the surface, arranging pressures that force you inward, not to destroy you, but to introduce you to the part of yourself that could not be built any other way. The soul you have now is not the soul you would have had if everything had gone according to plan. It carries more depth, more gravity, more sight, more silence, more truth. That may be the first great revelation. Your pain was not proof that you were forgotten. It may have been the first sign that your life was being written with unusual care. Once you begin to sense that your hardships were not meaningless, another question rises almost immediately, and it is a question filled with both awe and ache. Why does it seem that the people called toward deeper purpose are often the ones who suffer the most in the beginning? Why are the ones with unusual sensitivity given lives that can feel unusually heavy? Why are those with the strongest inner light so often led through years that feel dim, lonely, and uncertain? Thoth's wisdom points toward a difficult answer. It is because power without depth is dangerous, and purpose without purification easily becomes distortion. A person who is meant to carry insight, influence, healing, or spiritual force cannot be shaped only by comfort. If they were, they might mistake charisma for truth. They might confuse attention with authority. They might seek to be admired instead of becoming clear. So life begins its teaching early, often before the person even understands what is being prepared within them. This is why some people seem to enter the world already carrying a strange weight. Even as children, they feel different in ways they cannot explain. They notice things others overlook. They feel atmospheres deeply. They sense tension before anyone speaks. They absorb the moods of a room. They ask questions that sound too large for their age. And because the world does not always know what to do with that kind of depth, those souls often learn early what it means to feel misunderstood. They may be loved, but not fully seen. They may be surrounded by others, yet still feel inwardly alone. Something in them knows there is more to reality than what is visible, but they have not yet found the language to hold it. Then the greater tests begin. Rejection, delay, betrayal, loss. Sometimes the pattern becomes so repetitive that it starts to feel like a curse. You trust, and something fractures. You build, and something falls apart. You begin to rise, and some unseen force seems to pull you back into uncertainty. The ordinary mind reads this as failure. It assumes life is denying you what others receive with ease. But the deeper reading is very different. These tests are not always there to stop you. Many of them are there to strengthen your discernment, before your influence expands. A person who has never been deceived may remain naive about appearances. A person who has never lost direction may speak too casually about faith. A person who has never had to sit in silence without answers may know ideas, but not wisdom. The chosen are often broken first because they're being taught how not to build on fragile foundations. They're being shown what false love feels like, what borrowed identity feels like, what empty ambition feels like, so that later, when something real finally arrives, they can recognize its texture. This is why your journey may have felt slower than the journeys around you. It was not only about getting somewhere. It was about becoming someone who could hold what was coming without being consumed by it. Some souls are allowed quick success because their path does not require the same depth of transformation. Others are led through long seasons of inner refinement because what they will one day carry demands maturity that cannot be rushed. This can feel brutal when you're living it. It can feel like watching life hand easier lessons to everyone else while you remain inside a mystery that will not explain itself. Yet the soul is learning in those years with a seriousness the personality cannot yet appreciate. There's also another reason the chosen are tested so deeply. They're being emptied of false dependence. The human self wants to draw strength from things that can disappear. Recognition, certainty, relationships, status, routines, the approval of those it admires. But if your future work requires spiritual steadiness, those attachments must loosen. Life begins removing one support after another, not as punishment, but as revelation. Each loss asks the same hidden question. When this is gone, who are you now? When the plan fails, when the person leaves, when the image collapses, when the world does not confirm your worth, can you still remain rooted in something deeper? This is where many people misread their own breaking. They think they are being reduced, when in truth they are being uncovered. The cracking is not always destroying the self. It is exposing what was never solid enough to carry your real life. It is teaching you to distinguish between what comforts you and what actually sustains you. That lesson cannot be learned by theory alone. It has to enter the body. It has to move through your nights, your waiting, your disappointments, your prayers that seem to echo back unanswered. It has to become lived knowledge. And this is why those who have walked through true initiation often carry a different kind of presence. They may speak softly, but their words have weight. They may move simply, but there is gravity in them. They no longer chase every open door because they have learned that not every invitation is aligned. They no longer panic in silence because they have sat in places where silence became a teacher. They're slower to worship appearances, slower to trust charm, slower to betray themselves for belonging. Something in them has been tempered. That tempering is not glamorous. It is sacred, but it is not glamorous. It costs years. It costs innocence. It costs the old fantasy that life will spare you if your heart is sincere enough. Yet what it gives in return is far greater. It gives sight. It gives inner substance. It gives the kind of faith that does not depend on immediate reward. It gives the ability to stand inside uncertainty without surrendering to it. And perhaps most importantly, it gives compassion that is no longer abstract. You do not imagine the pain of others from a distance. You know what it is to break quietly and keep walking. So when Thoth reveals that the chosen are broken first, it is not a sentence of despair. It is a statement about preparation. It means the fire came early because the metal mattered. It means the shaping felt severe because the vessel was meant to hold something rare. It means your life could not remain shallow, even if part of you would have preferred it. The pressure was not proof that you were weak. It was proof that your soul was being asked to become durable, honest, and clear before destiny placed greater weight in your hands. And once you begin to understand that, the breaking no longer looks like the end of your story. It starts to look like the threshold where your true self was waiting to be born. And this is where the path becomes even more unsettling, because after the breaking has done its first work, after it has exposed the fragility of old supports and stripped away the easier explanations, something deeper begins to happen. You start to realize that the real loss was never only external. The harder loss is internal. It is the slow death of the person you thought you were. For a long time, most people live through a constructed self without even knowing it. They build an identity out of survival, habit, praise, fear, family expectation, social approval, old wounds, and private compensations. They become the reliable one, the impressive one, the strong one, the invisible one, the pleasing one, the one who never needs help, the one who always gives more than they have. These identities can function for years. Sometimes they even look admirable from the outside. They help a person move through the world. They create shape, direction, and a sense of stability. But beneath that surface, the soul knows when it is living through a role instead of from its center. That is why true struggle often feels like more than pain. It feels like disorientation. It interrupts the identity that once kept everything organized. Suddenly the self that knew how to manage life no longer works. The coping patterns lose their power. The beliefs that once brought comfort begin to sound hollow. Even your own reactions can start to surprise you. You may feel more emotional than before, more withdrawn, more alert, more tired of things you once chased. It can feel as though life is taking away your fluency in being the person you used to be. This is not accidental. It is the beginning of alchemy. Ancient alchemy was never only about turning metal into gold. At its deepest level, it was about transformation through dissolution. Something old had to be broken down before something finer could emerge. The false structure had to soften. The hardened material had to pass through fire. The impure elements had to separate from what was essential. Thoth, as a keeper of hidden laws and sacred intelligence, belongs to this same current of understanding. He represents the wisdom that sees transformation as a process of exposure. What is unreal cannot become eternal by being protected. It has to be seen, tested, and released. This is why your struggles may have attacked the exact places where your identity felt most secure. The relationship that made you feel chosen. The work that made you feel valuable. The plan that made you feel in control. The image of yourself as wise, needed, successful, or safe. When those things are shaken, the mind immediately calls it destruction. It believes life is taking away what defines you. And in one sense it is. But what it is taking away may be the costume, not the core. The false self always depends on conditions. It needs reinforcement. It needs a role to play, a mirror to reflect it back, a world that behaves in certain ways so it can continue believing its own story. The deeper self does not live like that. It can feel grief, but it is not made of grief. It can experience rejection, but it is not defined by rejection. It can pass through failure without becoming failure. It exists at a deeper level than the masks created by fear and longing. Yet most people never meet that deeper self clearly because life never pushes them far enough beyond the familiar performance. You were pushed. That may be why your life at times felt almost unbearably intense. It was not only asking you to survive events. It was asking you to surrender identities. And surrendering identity can feel more frightening than losing comfort because identity gives the illusion of continuity. It tells you who you are. It explains your place in the world. It gives your memories a shape and your future a direction. When it starts to die, there's a period where you may feel suspended between selves. You're no longer who you were, but you are not yet stable in what you are becoming. This middle state is one of the most difficult experiences on the spiritual path. It often feels empty. Time moves strangely there. You may outgrow conversations, ambitions, even environments that once felt natural. You may crave solitude without fully understanding why. You may stop reaching for things that used to excite you. You may feel called inward, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet and persistent way, as if something deeper is asking for space. Many people resist this season because they mistake it for depression, stagnation, or personal failure. Sometimes those states are present, and they deserve care and honesty. But sometimes what is happening is more mysterious. The old self is losing authority, and the soul is waiting for you to stop rebuilding the same prison with better language. That is the real alchemy inside your breaking. The fire was never meant only to hurt you. It was meant to reveal what in you could not survive truth. The need to be constantly validated. The need to appear invulnerable. The habit of abandoning yourself to keep connection. The fantasy that control can protect you from uncertainty. The hunger for external proof before you trust your inner knowing. These things do not disappear through insight alone. They are weakened through lived encounter. Life puts pressure on them until they crack. And when they crack, something quieter begins to emerge. Not a new performance, not a polished spiritual identity, not a grand declaration that you have transcended suffering. Something far simpler and far more real. You begin to tell the truth more easily. You begin to recognize your limits without shame. You become less interested in impressing people and more interested in being aligned. You stop forcing what is not fit. You notice how much energy it used to take to maintain versions of yourself that were never fully alive. A deeper honesty enters, a deeper stillness, a deeper patience with what cannot be rushed. This is the birth hidden inside the death. It does not arrive all at once. It comes in moments, in the way you no longer chase every sign of approval, in the way silence no longer feels like punishment, in the way your intuition becomes easier to hear because there are fewer false voices crowding it, in the way you start to sense that your worth has never depended on the roles that once seemed essential. The deeper self does not need constant defense. It does not need to dominate. It does not need to beg reality to confirm its existence. It knows itself more quietly than that. So when Thoth reveals that your suffering was part of the plan, this is one of the deepest meanings. The plan was not only to test your strength. It was to bring about a death that looked like loss from the outside, but was actually liberation at the level of the soul. The person you were could not carry the life that is waiting for you. Too much of that self was built from adaptation, fear, and inherited illusion. It had to be loosened. It had to be humbled. It had to pass through the sacred fire. And now, even if the process still feels unfinished, you may already sense the change. You are less easily seduced by appearances, less willing to betray your own knowing, less interested in the glittering masks people wear to hide their emptiness, more drawn to what is real, even when it is quiet, even when it asks more of you, even when it offers no immediate applause. That is not collapse. That is transmutation. That is the hidden gold beginning to separate itself from the ash. By the time you have passed through enough loss to see the false self beginning to fall away, another mystery starts to take shape, and this one can be harder to accept than pain itself. Pain at least feels active. It arrives with force. It announces itself. Delay is different. Delay is quiet. It stretches across months, sometimes years, and leaves you standing in a place where nothing seems clearly wrong, yet nothing fully opens. You pray, work, prepare, hope, listen, wait, and still the door remains closed. No clear rejection, no clear invitation, just silence, interruption, postponement, and the unsettling feeling that life keeps stopping at the exact edge of breakthrough. This is where many people begin to lose trust, not because they have stopped believing in meaning altogether, but because delayed meaning is far more difficult to live with than visible struggle. When life is openly hard, you can at least name the battle. When life becomes suspended, the mind starts feeding on uncertainty. It wonders whether you misunderstood your path, whether your intuition failed you, whether you waited for something that was never meant for you at all. It begins to interpret divine timing as abandonment and protection as punishment. But Thoth's wisdom moves differently. It does not read delay through the emotions of the present moment alone. It reads through sequence, readiness, and consequence. It understands that timing is not only about desire. It is about structure, A thing can be good and still be wrong for the moment. A door can be real and still remain shut until the one approaching it has changed enough to enter without distortion. What you call lateness may sometimes be the precision of a greater intelligence refusing to hand you a life your inner foundation could not yet sustain. This is difficult for the ordinary mind because the ordinary mind judges events by immediate relief. It believes the open door is always the blessing, the closed door always the tragedy. But experience teaches otherwise. Some things arrive too early and become burdens. Some relationships appear as answers and end as lessons in self-betrayal. Some opportunities flatter the ego while quietly draining the soul. Some successes land in unprepared hands and deepen confusion rather than clarity. What looks like progress from the outside can become misalignment at the level of destiny. That is why sacred timing often feels so severe. It is not trying to satisfy the impatient part of you. It is trying to protect the deeper part of you from entering a season before your perception is strong enough to navigate it. Sometimes the delay is not about the thing itself. It is about the version of you who would meet it. If the old self had received what you longed for, it might have turned the gift into another prison. It might have used love to avoid truth. It might have used success to inflate illusion. It might have used spiritual power to feed identity instead of service. So life waited, not to mock your longing, but to refine the one who was longing. Think of how many times you wanted something with complete sincerity, only to look back later and realize you were asking from a place that was still unsteady. You may have called it readiness because the desire felt intense, because the signs felt promising, because your plans were carefully made. Yet underneath that readiness, there may still have been hidden fear, hidden dependency, hidden hunger for validation, hidden fantasies about what the arrival of that one thing would finally prove. The deeper intelligence could see all of it. It could see what you could not. It could see that the blessing, if handed over too early, would be mixed with illusion and eventually become another source of pain. So the delay remained. At first, that delay feels empty, but over time it begins to do its own shaping. It deepens your interior life. It separates desire from desperation. It forces you to ask whether you want the thing itself or the feeling you imagine it will give you. It teaches you how much of your suffering comes not from absence alone, but from the meaning you assign to absence. It reveals where you have placed too much of your identity in outcomes that have not yet arrived. And very slowly, without announcing itself, it starts changing the quality of your waiting. This is one of the great hidden transformations. At the beginning, you wait with tension. You wait as if life owes you an explanation. You wait while secretly trying to force the timeline through will, ritual, analysis, overthinking, or constant interpretation of signs. But when the waiting becomes long enough, a more sober awareness enters. You begin to see that forcing is another form of fear. You begin to understand that trust is not passive, but spacious. It allows preparation without obsession. It allows hope without making hope into a demand. It lets the soul ripen in silence. That ripening matters more than most people know. The delayed years are often the years in which your perception becomes accurate. You start seeing what you once romanticized. You start recognizing patterns that used to rule you. You notice how often you were drawn to people, goals, or identities that reflected your wounds more than your truth. You become less fascinated by speed, less seduced by appearances, less likely to take every burst of momentum as destiny. A calmer intelligence begins to grow in you. You stop asking only, how soon can this happen? And start asking, what kind of life will this create if it comes now? That question changes everything. Because sometimes what is being protected is not only your future. It is also your innocence, your energy, your spiritual coherence. There are paths that would have split you from yourself. There are connections that would have bound you to a lesson you no longer need. There are victories that would have trapped you inside public success and private emptiness. There are invitations that would have taken you farther from your center while convincing everyone around you that you were finally winning. A closed door may have saved you from years of hidden erosion. And of course, you cannot always know this in the moment. That is what makes delay so humbling. It asks for reverence without full explanation. It asks you to continue becoming without constant reassurance. It asks you to believe that not all silence is absence, and not all slowness is denial. The old mind wants visible proof. The deeper soul learns to read a subtler language. It learns that what does not move may still be preparing. It learns that the unseen world is not measured by human urgency. It learns that timing is not cruel simply because it refuses to obey desire. Thoth, as the intelligence of sacred measure, would remind you that everything powerful has its rhythm. The stars move by rhythm. The flood and the drought move by rhythm. The seed and the harvest move by rhythm. Wisdom itself has rhythm. Nothing truly alive unfolds through force alone. It unfolds through sequence. First the breaking, then the clearing, then the deeper seeing, then the stabilization of the self that no longer needs illusion. Only then can certain doors open without destroying the one who walks through them. So perhaps the delays in your life were not dead space. Perhaps they were chambers of protection, places where the unseen held you back from futures that looked bright but were built on unstable ground. Places where your soul was given time to become less reactive, less naive, less divided. Places where your longing was purified until it could finally align with truth rather than fantasy. What felt like being left behind may have been the careful mercy of being held back until your inner world could carry what your outer world was asking for. And once that realization begins to settle, the silence changes. It no longer feels empty in the same way. It begins to feel inhabited. It begins to feel as though something has been watching over the sequence all along, refusing to let your life become smaller just because you were impatient to escape uncertainty. The closed doors start looking different. The late answers start looking different. Even the seasons when you thought nothing was happening begin to reveal themselves as precise, protective, and quietly sacred. Then one day you understand that delay was never the opposite of destiny. It was one of the ways destiny guarded your becoming. And after all of that, after the breaking, after the false identities begin to fall away, after the long delays that taught you how to wait without losing yourself, there comes a quieter revelation, one that does not arrive with thunder or spectacle. It comes with recognition, not the kind that the world gives, not applause, not sudden proof that everyone who doubted you was wrong. It comes as an inner remembering, almost like hearing a truth you somehow knew before language. You begin to understand that your life was never only about surviving pain. It was about awakening through it. This is the moment when the old question starts to dissolve. For so long, you may have asked why your path was harder, why your heart had to learn through rupture, why you seemed to walk through deserts while others moved through gardens. That question made sense when you were still standing inside the wound, trying to protect yourself from one more disappointment. But once your vision changes, the question itself begins to lose its grip. You no longer look at your life as a punishment in search of explanation. You begin to see it as an initiation in search of meaning. And meaning changes the atmosphere of everything. It does not erase grief. It does not rewrite your losses into something sentimental. It does not ask you to pretend that what happened was easy or pleasant or fair. It simply reveals that beneath the visible story, another story was moving. One that was not centered on comfort, but on awakening. One that was not trying to make your life look smooth, but to make your soul become real. One that was not measuring success by how quickly you gained what you wanted, but by how deeply you came to know what cannot be taken from you. That is when remembrance begins. You remember that your sensitivity was never weakness. It was perception before it had language. You remember that your solitude was not always abandonment. Sometimes it was the only environment where your deeper mind could begin to speak. You remember that the betrayals were not simply random cruelty crossing your path. They revealed where your trust needed wisdom, where your love needed boundaries, where your longing for connection had made you overlook what your intuition already knew. You remember that the delays did not make you smaller. They forced you to stop building a future around illusions that could never hold your real life. And perhaps most powerfully, you remember that something in you survived every version of the story. That matters more than most people understand. So much in life changes shape. Relationships end. Identities collapse. Beliefs evolve. Dreams are lost, replaced, reimagined. But through all of it, there's a deeper continuity that remains. A quiet witness. A core intelligence. A soul presence that keeps gathering experience without being destroyed by it. When you finally start living closer to that place, you stop feeling so fragmented by change. You realize that what was essential in you is never the role, never the title, never the image, never even the pain. What was essential was the consciousness learning through all of it. This is why the chosen eventually become difficult to deceive. It is not because they know everything. It is because they have lived through enough inner death to recognize what is false. They can feel when something is inflated. They can sense when words are disconnected from essence. They can see the difference between noise and truth, urgency and alignment, performance and presence. Their authority no longer comes from certainty alone. It comes from contact with reality. They have been humbled enough to stop worshiping appearances. Thoth's revelation lives here. The plan was never merely about events. It was about consciousness. It was about taking a soul through enough contrast that it would begin to perceive law, rhythm, consequence, and hidden order. It was about teaching you that not everything is visible when it begins, and not everything painful is empty. It was about leading you through the strange education of becoming someone who can read life symbolically, not superstitiously, but deeply. Someone who can look at a season and ask not only what is happening, but what is forming. Someone who can endure mystery without rushing to flatten it into shallow answers. That is the shift from wounded identity to awakened participation. Before, life happened to you, or at least that is how it felt. Circumstances rose and fell. People came and went, and you tried to interpret your worth from the movement of those external things. But now a subtler relationship begins to form. You start living with life rather than merely under it. You start noticing what each season is asking of you. You stop demanding that every chapter look like progress according to ordinary standards. You become more attentive to timing, to resonance, to what expands your inner truth and what contracts it. You begin cooperating with your becoming. And that cooperation brings a new kind of strength. Not the strange strength that is always bracing for another blow, but the deeper strength that knows you have already survived the kinds of endings that once terrified you. You no longer need every door to open immediately. You no longer need every connection to last forever in order for it to have mattered. You no longer need instant clarity before taking the next quiet step. Something in you has matured beyond those old hungers. You can move more slowly now, but more truly. You can trust what is real even when it arrives without spectacle. This is often the stage where people around you start sensing a difference, even if they cannot name it. You may seem calmer, but the calm is not passivity. It is depth. You may speak less, but your words carry more precision. You may appear less interested in proving yourself, and that itself becomes a form of quiet power. The old need to force outcomes starts losing its authority. You become more selective with your energy, more reverent with your attention, more unwilling to hand your inner life over to what is shallow, frantic, or false. That is not withdrawal from life. It is a fuller entrance into it. Because once remembrance takes hold, you do not become distant from the world. You become more intimate with truth inside it. You begin to see that every person is carrying some visible story and some hidden initiation. You become gentler where once you were reactive, clearer where once you were confused, less addicted to the dramatic surface of events, more curious about the deeper movement underneath them. Even suffering looks different, not smaller, not easy, but more transparent to meaning. You can feel its cost without denying its power to transform. And this is the real magnificence hidden in the chosen path. It is not that the chosen are spared. It is that they are brought, often unwillingly, into conscious relationship with the architecture of becoming. Their life teaches them to see what others may spend decades avoiding. It teaches them the cost of illusion, the value of inner honesty, the mystery of timing, the holiness of discernment. It teaches them that destiny is not a reward dropped into a passive life. It is a state of alignment earned through surrender, purification, patience, and remembrance. So when you finally look back, the pattern becomes harder to deny. The seasons that seemed empty were preparing depth. The losses that seemed cruel were clearing false attachments. The people who left exposed where you were still bargaining away your truth. The delays gave your spirit time to mature. The confusion drove you inward until you found a voice deeper than fear. Even the ache that once made you feel singled out begins to reveal another meaning. You are being singled in, drawn inward, called beneath the surface of ordinary living so you could remember what your life was really asking of you. Not perfection, not invulnerability, not endless suffering, presence, alignment, consciousness, the ability to stand inside your own life and recognize that the soul has been involved from the beginning. And once that recognition fully enters you, the phrase chosen one starts losing its vanity and regaining its sacred weight. It no longer means someone superior. It means someone who has been brought through enough inner fire to become available to truth. Someone who no longer wants only blessing, but understanding. Someone who no longer asks life to remove every difficulty, but asks to meet each season with greater clarity. Someone who remembers that the plan was never just about getting what the ego desired. It was about becoming capable of carrying what the soul came here to embody. So now the path opens in a different way. Not because every mystery has been solved, but because you no longer need life to explain itself before you trust its depth. Not because pain will never return, but because pain is no longer the only language you hear. Not because you have become finished, but because you have become conscious. And that changes everything. You can feel in the way you breathe now when uncertainty returns. In the way you do not rush so quickly to call every closed door a failure. In the way you sense that something larger may still be shaping what you cannot yet see. In the way your spirit has become less frantic, less divided, less willing to live against itself. You are remembering, and remembrance is one of the holiest forms of arrival. So let the mind grow quiet for a moment now. Let all the old urgency soften. Let the need to solve your whole life tonight drift into the background. Feel the deeper truth beneath the story. You have been carried through more than you understood at the time. You have been shaped in ways that were invisible while they were happening. The soul learns slowly, like dawn entering a dark room, not all at once, but with a light that becomes undeniable. Rest inside that for a moment. The losses have spoken. The silence has spoken. The delays have spoken. Even the nights when you thought nothing was happening were not empty. Something was being written beneath the surface. Something patient. Something precise. Something ancient enough to wait for your understanding to catch up. And now you do not need to force the next revelation. You only need to remain present enough to receive it. The path ahead does not require a harder mask. It asks for a truer self. It asks for the steady heart that has already been tempered by mystery. It asks for the kind of listening that no longer panics in silence. It asks for your willingness to walk forward without abandoning what you now know. Breathe gently and remember, the plan was not against you. The fire was not wasted. The waiting was not empty. The soul was being taught its own depth. And whatever comes next, you do not meet it as the person who first entered the struggle. You meet it as someone who has seen through appearances, someone who has been humbled into wisdom, someone who can finally feel the sacred thread running through the whole design. That is enough for this moment. Let that be enough.